All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Kaysville Power Board monthly meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to ask Sean to give our opening ceremonies.
Okay, sounds good. Our dear and kind Heavenly Father, we come together at this time before Thee and begin by expressing gratitude and appreciation for the goodness of our lives and opportunities and blessings that we enjoy at Thy hand. Heavenly Father, we invite and pray for Thy Spirit to guide us this night and help us to know of those things that we can do that will be in the best interest of Kaysville and the people, the good people of this area. We are grateful for the opportunity to serve and just pray that we'll be able to do so in the best way possible. We pray that we'll be able to have wisdom and insights as to what we can do to best fulfill our duties here in this commission. And we thank Thee once again for all the blessings that we receive, and we do this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Sean. Okay, and I know last time we talked, well, before we dive into your model, we talked on having a representative for the Utah Solar Association. So I've asked him to, I've not put it on the agenda, but when we call the public, Ryan Evans, president of the Utah Solar Association, is here for any review. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jordan, on model.
Do you want us to go through and introduce ourselves?
I do that every time.
That's okay.
Start with you, Jordan, on the introduction. Sorry.
Jordan Stevenson.
Sean Chilcote.
Brock Thane.
Alan Farnes. John Lovelace.
Susan Lee.
Stacy Harward.
Gary Hatch. Bruce Rigby.
Okay.
All right.
Try again. So we'll turn it back over to you on the model review, Jordan.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so where we had kind of left things with a few outstanding points of data that we were hoping to put into the model and be able to finalize, well, maybe not finalize, but propose, I would come and propose kind of the results based on those things. So we've got commercial data that the city was helpful to do. Dean from the finance department was able to get commercial data with the help of Cami, I believe, from the city as well, and industrial data. And so last time we met, we had kind of left off on residential, and I've got that in here. The other bit of data was Brock was going to help kind of get average weather informed production on solar. So we have kind of the I think it's a 30-year history feeding into our typical or our average production for a 7-kilowatt solar customer to kind of inform these rates. And prior to that, we were using a 12-month period, I think, that John had measured and given us. And your measurements were actually in the ballpark of where the 30-year average ended up being. So it must not have been a super hot or super cold year that we were looking at, but
It was above average. Yes.
Was it a little above average?
I don't know.
I think it was. I think it came in a little lower on production using the 30-year average, but we were pretty close. But we've got that in there, so we're a little more refined. And so I'll just go through here, but I just wanted to thank everybody over the last month, or even stretching back longer, at the city and Brock and everyone who's helped kind of compile all the data that's in here. So it's been very helpful to get it in here. But since we've walked through kind of how the model works, and this is hopefully large enough to see.
Do you mind focusing that? It seems slightly off focus.
Is it?
It always seems to be just slightly off at first. I don't know
And I can zoom in a little
there.
bit more too. I'm just trying to
That's
fill
better.
in the real estate.
No,
Right there.
right there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that looks pretty
that's
good.
a lot better. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just briefly review kind of these sections of the model and then show you where we ended up. So on the total revenue requirement, we've got everything functionalized by whether it's a generation or transmission related item, whether it's distribution or customer related. You can see those in this column here that says current operations. we have some adjustments to get to our total revenue requirement. That's $14.7 million for the city. That is kind of a forward-looking revenue requirement. So we've done some inflation adjustments and looked forward into the rate effective period of what that might look like. Moving down, we've calculated the proposed customer charge, which takes the $1.1 million we've identified as customer-related items that make up the revenue requirement that's driven by the number of customers. So as customers come on, what kind of items do you have in there? Meters, service lines, meter maintenance, customer service-related items, and that's the $1.1 million that we have in our customer-related bucket. And the result is a customer charge to each class. And last time we only had one commercial class, and so it was all lumped in together. And one of the proposals that we kicked around last time we were together was, since we have a very diverse customer class where you have some commercial customers who are the size of a residential customer in reality, and then some commercial customers who are much larger, it maybe makes sense to break that out so that we're not having rate shock for the small commercial. And so we've done that, and with the help of Bruce and Dean from the city, we've looked at some other cities and what the customer charges look like, and we've split it based on the demand of the customers. And so, and I can show you the details on that if you'd like, but the commercial A class represents the first quartile of the commercial class of the population we're looking at. And then the commercial B is the second and third quartiles of that class, looking at demand, if that makes sense. And then the fourth quartile is our commercial C class, and those are all the 25% largest customers in the commercial class. So that's kind of where the lines come from on that.
So to clarify, Jordan, you're saying that we have three classes or two? Three?
Three
A,
commercial,
B, and C?
yeah, A,
Okay.
B, and C. Yep.
Okay. And
Yep.
what are the demand levels that we're breaking them out into? Do we have a definition?
Yeah, so the A class goes up to 9 kilowatt of demand. The B class goes from 9 up to 38, and the C goes from 38 all the way up. Our largest customer is 650 kilowatts, I think. So you can see that 75% of the commercial customers are below 38 kilowatt, and the other 25% get really, really large. So it was a pretty diverse class. So,
And do you have quantities on A, B, and C by chance?
I do. Let me see where we stuck that. Yeah, I just have to find the right tab. I can't remember if this is, what I'm going to do is just hide the name of the customers here. Okay, so we've got in the first class, sorry, I should have just had this summarized in an easier way. Commercial A, you've got 363 customers in there.
How many?
363. Below 9 kilowatt of recorded demand. And this is based on 12 months ending December 2016. Then in the middle two tiers, you'll have 243, so that's the commercial class B. And then in the top tier, you'd have 120. So,
And how does it work if you go above 9 kW? Do you jump to a...
it keeps steadily increasing pretty gradually. Let's see. So moving up, you've got we're starting at a customer who has 9.01 kW, and it just kind of gradually builds up to 10, 11, 12, 13. There's not really an obvious break, if that's what you're wondering.
I'm just curious if you have a customer that's in 9 kW, under 9 kW, is it like they jump to the, say they did 10 the next month, would that be something that we would track on the 10? Or would they move to a B, or what, kind of.
You're wondering, like, when do they move to the next class?
Correct.
And what we did is we looked at the 12-month history, and we picked the maximum demand over the last 12 months. And so we could talk about that. What are the options? We could look at the last 12 months and see if the maximum demand jumped over 9, do we move them onto the commercial B class, or do we average the last 2 or 3 years to kind of even it out and smooth it out a little more? I'm open to proposals on that. So,
remind me again how the demand is calculated. Is it just based on an hour, any hour?
It's
of
a
the month?
15-minute interval, and
Okay.
Highest 15 minute.
highest 15 minutes each
interval.
month.
Okay.
It gets cleared every month and starts over.
Okay.
So we've got 12 months worth of data measuring the highest 15 minutes of each of those months, and then we just took the maximum for that
Okay.
12 months.
Wow.
Seems like Rocky Mountain Power, if they go over for two months during the year or something, then they'll bump them into that next class.
Yeah, I think you get moved to Schedule 8 if you're over for a certain duration. So.
Yeah. And so it just depends on how, who's watching it and how much vigilance you want to have watching that. If you want to just do a 12-month kind of thing, it kind of, I don't know whose job that would be to monitor, if customers start getting over that, but we'd have to
I'm sure
come up with some kind
set
of,
up in the billing too to pick that kind of stuff up. You can set parameters and things in there. So
to flag it and
yes.
ping you that, hey, this is starting to go over. Yeah. So.
Sure, there's 100 different ways to do it. I guess it wouldn't be bad to follow that pattern. Just if a customer's over for 2 months in a 12-month period, that you move them to the next class, and then I guess they could request to move back down if they went 12 months without it.
Yeah.
It seems reasonable. I mean, but there's, I'm sure, 100 ways to do it.
Yeah. So that's what kind of the population looks like in each of those classes. Sorry, going back up here. So it used to be that this was all averaged out. I think it was around $35 in our last model for the commercial class. Now you've got commercial A that's 11, commercial B that's 13, and then commercial C that would be a $59 customer charge.
Oh, what was the last one? I can't read that.
59 for the largest commercial customers. And then the industrial's the same at $90. I think that's about where we were last time as well. So then after determining the customer charge, this next section just calculates the volumetric rates. Not a lot changed here. I did add a new column for demand, and we aren't proposing a demand charge in the residential class at this point, so I didn't have it in the model last time. But getting into the commercial rate structure, we need to start analyzing demand determinants to come up with a demand rate. So I've added that into the model. So this is the billable demand. And I didn't state this before, but on the commercial A class, I would propose not having a demand rate. Currently, we don't charge a demand fee on anyone who has less than 8 kilowatt, I think. So for the commercial A, anyone under 9 kilowatt wouldn't have a demand charge. And then in commercial B, you would introduce that demand charge. So that's from 9 to 38 kilowatt. And then in commercial C, you would also be assessing the demand charge there. So I'll show you what that looks like as we continue on here. This is the residential class actual rates. They haven't changed much since we spoke last time, and we can get into the details more. The one that did shift a little bit was the solar net metering credit. It was around 7 cents. I think it was just under 7 where we left last time. Now it's 6.5, 6.48 cents. That's based on the lower average production. We had a little bit higher production in that year that we were using, and using the 30-year average, it's a little lower. So that shifted that rate a little bit, but still pretty close to where we were.
Did you, sorry, I jump in.
Yeah.
On that rate, did you determine the subsidy that we're receiving on a total? When I say we, John?
So if you were to do a full rate credit, your average, let's see. So ignoring the tiers, our average rate is 8.8 cents. And so if you were to net meter 8.8 rather than 6.5, that would imply a 2.3 or 2.34 cent subsidy. That's just a quick way of looking at it. But.
Okay.
All right, so this section is all new here. This is the commercial class proposed structure. So we have the 3 different tiers of kilowatt usage, kilowatt per hour. I kept the same structure we currently have in the commercial class. So from 0 to 1,000 kilowatt hours, we have a rate, and then from 1,001 to 9,000, and then all above 9,000 is a different rate. And you can see that the volumetric rates are slightly lower than they were before. So we are at 9 cents today, 6.5 cents in Tier 2, and 4.8 cents in Tier 3. And those are all close, but a little lower, and that's because now we're proposing a customer charge. So the fixed portion of the bill per month is going up, and those volumetric rates are shrinking a little bit, but that's where we're at. And then, so we would expect to collect $2.8 million of the revenue requirement from the commercial class by assessing a kilowatt hour charge of these amounts that you see here. And then the remaining we would do through either a customer charge or a demand charge. And so the demand charge that I calculate is $11.59 for all power over 8 for our commercial B customers, and $14.49 for commercial C customers. And then the customer charge is just shown here below, $11.13.59. And that makes up the remaining portion of the revenue that we would seek to collect in the upcoming. So the total revenue is $4.9 million. And you can see here that totals up to your total revenue that we've assigned to the commercial class through the cost of service study of $4.9 million.
Is there a rate for solar for commercial?
I didn't include a rate for solar for commercial in here. It sounds like the precedent on commercial has kind of been a separate policy from residential, and we could look more into having a discussion on that, but I didn't get that far yet. So
another question, Jordan. I'm just wondering, thinking about the residential and how we were looking at trying to shape usage or encourage better usage based on peak. I mean, within commercial, there's nothing there other than the demand. Is that correct?
yeah, I think the demand does add that component to it. That can influence your bill quite a bit if your peak jumps up or down.
I guess my thought is it encourages commercial to be more level, maybe, and try not to have peaks, but not necessarily to avoid using a lot of power at that peak challenging time for the system, correct?
Right, yeah. And ultimately, if we do implement a time of use rate structure down the road a couple years from now, we may benefit doing the same for commercial customers and have the kilowatt hour charge reflect that peak value that's there in the charge. So we could shape it a little more that way. I was just keeping the current structure already in place.
Yeah.
For the kind of the near term. It's what customers are used to. We're introducing a customer charge as well, so there's and I thought the peak charge does a pretty good job of incentivizing customers to manage their own personal peak. But you're right, the time of when that peak occurs isn't necessarily being signaled here.
Yeah, that's all right. I just was processing that and thinking about it, so thanks.
Yeah.
I would think a commercial customer that does get solar, say they use 15 kilowatts pretty regularly, they size their array. They're probably going to do very little backfeeding, is what I'm saying. They're going to size the array for the amount they're consuming at the time, and they might backfeed a little, but probably be very rare occurrence. So there's really no burden to the grid, really, if because they're just consuming it right what they're consuming what they're producing on the spot.
And I believe what we currently have in place for commercial is more like the feed-in tariff arrangement, where their solar is just feeding directly into the grid at a separate rate than what they're paying. Is that right, Bruce?
Yeah.
And so it's almost treated like a completely separate arrangement where we're paying for their power, and then they're just buying power from us separate. But
What was that rate on that, on the feed-in tariff?
Way it's set now, it's 6.18 cents right now.
On the feed-in?
Commercial came out higher than residential because they use it the time they're producing it.
I see.
That's,
Okay. What about, and I'm assuming it's coming up, but what about these rates and what they would look like? So if we implement the $11 charge and the demand charge, so I can see that we're going to get to the revenue, but if you take that's 363 customers under 9 kW, what is their bill today? What is their bill on Schedule A, essentially?
yeah, so that's a good question. I believe that Dean and Cami are working on showing the impact on different levels of usage, and I don't have that yet in the model, but we will want to check that. So,
Because one of the thoughts that I have is, if we're going to move to a time of day usage anyway, on the 9 kW, obviously what we're trying to do is by the demand charges equalize to get to your revenue stream there, right? Just kind of find out what actually works. But once we have that data, it may be advantageous to just start with the demand charge at 9 if we need to make up more money. You know what I'm saying? If there's too high of rate shock there.
yeah,
So
that makes
that
sense.
depends on the numbers, I guess. So I'll put it down here.
Yeah, that's a good follow-up item. I'll check with the finance department and see if they've run those scenarios. If not, it's something we could pick a couple customers in here, even anonymously. We could probably do it pretty quick tonight. Just kind of randomly sample some customers, and I think I have their usage and their demand in here, so
We could average.
we could say what were the rates prior, figure out what the bill would have been, and what are the rates that we're proposing, and how does that affect the bill. John could probably do it in 2 or 3 minutes for us real quick. So,
But I think it's a challenge.
in his head, I think.
Oh,
Um,
I don't know about that, but
'cause I
It's
think
always a little nerve-wracking doing it right on the spot publicly, because I always find errors after the fact, but
Well, I've always been
I
told
don't
never
think
do
that
math.
would be too difficult of an analysis to do, so.
Never do math in public.
never do math on camera.
On
Yeah.
camera.
So I think the sensitivity that we could take like the average of the 363, and then what we could do is the lower case and the higher case, and that'd give us,
The range of the impact we're talking
Correct.
about, yeah,
yeah.
we could do that. So that's the commercial. The industrial really doesn't have a whole lot of change there. We weren't recommending any big change to the industrial other than just a customer charge there. So the power rate is listed here, $13.28, and the customer charge of $90, and then a 3.3 cent rate. And that one we'd probably want to do a kind of an analysis the same way. Where are they at today? Where would they be
That's
on the
just
new
pulling
rate?
up their info.
We just have the one industrial customer, right?
Yeah.
Just the mill?
Yep.
Okay.
And then this is part of the long-term look. Once we have the smart meters in place, the time of use rates, but we wouldn't be proposing that here immediately, so not much has changed with that calculation. So those are the big changes, and the other, there's a piece we hadn't talked a whole lot about yet up to this point, but I know it's been kicked around, but the idea of should there be kind of an application fee up front, and if that were the case, how do you calculate it? What kind of charges do you include in there? And so I'm not sure if anyone has any specific proposal on that, but that's not included in the model either. So
An application fee for what?
for a net metering agreement. Sorry.
Okay.
Just under we've talked about what kind of analysis does the city want to do to assure that you know, the panel is right-sized and there aren't concerns there, and if there's additional cost to the city to do that, do we want to have an application fee that is kind of meant to cover some of that additional labor? So
in addition to the permitting fee that they pay already, an application fee to kind of study the impact of their system?
yeah, that's what I'm curious about. Or maybe the permitting fee covers it. That's something I haven't analyzed yet at this point. So these rates are just kind of forward-looking. Once someone's on the grid, what does it look like? But the connection process, I don't know if there's been a proposal to revamp that, but I haven't included that in this analysis at this point. So.
We need to look at that, because there's nothing other than the permit fee, which only includes a plan review. It doesn't have anything to do with engineering or, you know, anything on our distribution system, so.
Well, would there be a reason to need to do two different fees? I mean, if we can stick with just one fee, whether it be just a permitting fee or an application fee, I think that we should do that, and just make sure that it would cover all the costs.
So adjust the level, but
Yeah,
keep it as just
yeah.
a single fee.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'd do.
And so if there's specific line items that we currently include, and maybe a list of some we think we're incurring but we're not including, maybe that's just an exhibit that we can try to get together over the next couple weeks, and you know, propose a new. I don't know what the fee currently is or how much we think we're.
Starts on our side right now is $100 for the net.
Do you want to pull the microphone down so they can hear you?
That's it, just net meter fee. So
You said $100 fee is what you
$100.
said.
And that covers the.
That's just the meter.
That's the meter.
cost.
Okay.
And that covers the cost of the meter. That's what the meter costs.
Yeah, the 1 meter.
Okay.
Net meter, we just reprogram that, or their regular meter, program that into net meter. So
Is
So that-
all the? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, does that cover all the costs that the city incurs when they sign up? Is that covering?
doesn't cover anything but the exact cost for the meter. That's it. There's no
No
other-
labor.
That's why we need to look
Okay.
at that.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
so
we
that's
need to
what we would
revisit that. I
discuss.
think that we need somebody to go through and just put together best estimate on what the labor costs, and that we should review it and approve it. I think that
Well,
a net meter person should pay their fair share to connect.
I think-
Well, there's still a lot of other fees that the city doesn't incur directly, but the customer pays for the plans to be checked and things like that for the engineer to look over. But those
Has
aren't.
nothing to do with our system.
Has nothing to do with the system.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So is someone are they paying an inspection fee for someone to come out and look at it?
No, well, our inspectors inspect. They send the plans to someone that's expert in solar, and they review the plans, and then our inspectors inspect it. So,
But we're not collecting anything for that?
well, I don't know what the permit fee is and stuff. That's all included in the plan permit, for their end of it.
It's
to
like
view the
$300-400.
$400. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
That's their.
I could tell you what mine was.
Okay.
Who
But
does
not our
that go
end of
to?
it,
Who
so.
does that $300 or $400 go to?
It's paid to, well, I don't know what it is now, but it's paid to the city, but then that, some of it goes to to Doug.
Doug Smith that's doing it.
Yeah.
Correct.
Do the plan check, and I don't know how you
Yeah,
guys divide it
I
up
don't
though.
have any idea how the building office works over there, so.
So it's just a different part of Kaysville. It's a different group and a different
It's just-
structure.
Yeah, it's just a plan, for the plans and inspections.
So they do that for Kaysville, is
Yeah,
what you're
for Kaysville.
saying? Okay. So
That is
really,
our building department.
oh, okay. So we really, those fees are covered then on what they pay on the solar side.
They're the plan and review and the inspections covered, but nothing to do with connecting to the power.
So
and
none of the other labor
anything
costs?
that we have to do. Yeah,
Okay,
it's not
so none of
really
that is covered at all? Okay, so
So-
then that's what
yeah.
we would
You're
need.
just collecting the cost of the meter. You're not collecting anything for the labor to go and install it.
Nope, none of that.
For any inspection or review and approval,
Yeah.
there's other labor, there's other
System
hours, and
That's what they get charged for on the building side.
So let
Now-
me ask this real quick then. If somebody were to come and just sign up for power, they move into the city and they sign up for power, what do they pay to sign up for power?
It depends on if it's existing, the systems are existing. I don't know exactly, but if it's a new residential, I bill them the actual cost, labor, equipment of extending the electrical extension cost.
Okay, so it would not be showing any favor one way or the other if we look at the solar people and say, well, they need to pay for that step as well, because people that come in and pay for just power that aren't solar people, they have to pay for the hookups and everything.
Oh, yeah, and
So-
they also pay for the meter reader or whoever to go out and hook them up if they're disconnected. and
Okay.
They do pay for that.
Okay,
Like
so
$50
it's just a step that is being missed with the solar people.
Correct.
Okay, just making sure.
So
Should also include setting the account up, entering the meter information, the name connected to it. I mean, there's some
Extra
additional
fees.
labor here at City Hall to go with that as well.
And I would almost recommend, just when we were walking around, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd almost recommend a system impact study fee for all customers, as a new application, because what I don't believe is happening, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to be reviewing what the impacts of adding a line extension, those types of things are on the grid. That's pretty common that it comes in, and then that gets passed to the customer if there's, substation upgrades or those types of things. So,
Or down to the distribution transformer level, that's what we have to decide,
so I
Okay.
think that fee would, it's really common.
Yeah.
And then Rocky Mountain Power has a limit, after a certain KW, then they just charge you $1 KW is how they do it for solar. So, one, I think we need a general fee. But then two, the solar fee has a certain amount on a net metering application that goes in. And I can't remember what the residential fee is off the top of my head, but the commercial is free for a certain KW, and then it's $1 per KW up to a certain amount. That's how it works.
We are collecting an impact fee from a developer, aren't we? And what is that
Oh, we are?
based on?
Based on the size of service,
Service.
amperage size, main breaker size.
While you guys are going, I'll see if I can find the price of what I paid for the permit.
On the
I think sorry, go ahead, John.
just real quick on the fee for the meter, you said the $120 is the
It's 100.
$100. So is that just the difference in the 2 meters? Like you would take the existing meter off and put a net meter on, or is that just the cost of a whole new meter?
That's the cost of one whole new meter.
One whole
like
new
I said,
meter.
the other meter they have on their house, I can reprogram to be a net meter, so we don't charge them for that.
Okay.
So it's just a 1 meter and the one charge for 1 meter.
So are you putting 2 meters on a house now that are solar?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone has a production meter and a net meter.
Can 1 meter do both?
Nope.
Read production and consumption?
Nope, because the net meter gives you back received what they receive back, but it doesn't tell you what they internally use in their house.
Right.
That's why the production meter is always different than what the received is, depending on what they internally use, because the meter doesn't see it either way. So you have to have that production meter to get what their production is.
So you're putting a meter, so the solar panels comes down to the inverter and then goes through the production meter, and then another meter measures what's consuming from the house.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think I've walked through all the big changes, and we can continue to walk through more details if you'd like. I guess there is one bit of data that we didn't see yet, but that's just the data that came from the, is it Mark?
Mark, yeah.
Yeah. And that is, let's see. Sorry, it's a little hard to see here. Oh, the total production. So, based on Mark's analysis, if we have a 7 kW array size, I have to make sure I'm looking in the right place here. We end up with 9,752 kilowatt hours generated over the year. I think last time we looked at it, it was like 10,500. So it did shrink to 9,752.
This is a 7 kilowatt system?
Yeah.
That seems low still.
And this one we're looking at is a southwest facing. I
So you're
think we have a
saying-
scenario in here. If it's south facing, it's 10,128. And then the west facing is 8,210.
Yeah, that's assuming 3.8 sun hours per year, or 3.8 sun hours per day on average. That seems really low for this region.
It's pretty accurate. So typically you're 1440 per kilowatt hour per kilowatt peak. So if you take 7 times the 1440, that should give you what you would assume a production number is.
Okay.
And then what these numbers are is this is ran with a bankable software. So if you were to run this with NREL, like PV Watts or something, it's going to give you probably a little bit higher number. But these numbers are actually what you can actually take in and actually get a loan on. So it's using a bankable software. So these will be conservative, slightly conservative, but according to that, it's about $13.93 on 1440. So approximately 3% off of what you would see for here.
Okay.
So
Maybe my system's just doing way better than that.
yes, if you look at the south end, so that's the number that you're looking at.
Okay.
So that's due south.
Due south.
Yeah, so the top one was south what?
It's a mixture, yeah, southwest. So this is southwest. The south is 10,128, and then the
Southwest.
west facing 8,210.
Okay.
So in each of these cases, you can see, based on this new production under the current net metering agreement, what the total bill ends up being and the total production credit. So under the current rates, this particular scenario, southwest facing array would result in a total credit of $884 compared to a total billed amount of $1,011. So the total net bill would be $156 that customer would have paid over a year. And then under the time of use arrangement that we've discussed, where your back feed rate is higher in the peak hours and lower in the middle of the day. It ends up being a credit of $659 over the course of the year, and so the total bill ends up being $408. So it's a $194 impact, annual impact, or $16 per month impact on the southwest scenario. Strictly south, it ends up being a $229 impact, and then for the west-facing customer, $147.
Can you scroll those out for a second? I want to just look at those, just so I can see them side by side. Just
Oh,
zoom out
sure.
For a sec. There you go.
Sorry, that's probably going to be
Good enough. Here, let me just write them down. Sorry.
You're good. Here, I'll zoom in a little and pick this one. So this is the annual bill here, column Z. Let me go out a little bit. So you're at 156 versus 409.
So column Z is what it would be currently,
Yeah.
and AK is what it would be proposed.
So that's the southwest scenario. And then facing due south, currently it's 122 versus 409 under the proposed. And then the west facing would be going from a 276 annual bill to 481, so $147. So it impacts west facing customers least because you've got more production happening in the peak window.
Makes sense.
So
Jordan, that's not based on the time of use rates, is that? Those calculations done on the time of use?
yeah, this is done on the time of use. So that uses kind of that peak window, and you're talking about a 10 or 11 cent net metering rate in the evening versus a 5 cent rate, throughout the middle of the day. So what the 6.5 cent rate is that we discussed last time, we discussed taking the southwest scenario and saying, what's the annual bill to a southwest facing customer under the time of use rate structure, and it's $409. And so I determined what the net metering rate would have to be under our current structure to get you that $408, and that's the 6.5 cents. So that's how I calculated that. So if I show you the impact using our near-term solution where it's 6.5 cents in the middle of the day, 6.5 cents in the peak window, you end up at the $408. And so this would kind of treat everyone as if they have a southwest facing array. And then once you actually do have the time of use capability, then you could more directly bill based on how production is actually occurring per customer. So
let's walk through, unless people have questions. I gotta digest this for a second.
Sure.
And it's a little raw, so they're gonna get me when you and I are just sitting at the Hunt Electric. So fair warning, what you guys are up for.
No, this is good.
So let's just use the model that you just said there. How much would that 7 kW produce, kilowatt hours? I know Mark sent this to you. What is that number, just real quick? I want to see that.
So the 7 kW produces 9,752.
So 9,752. So if we were taking our today's rates, if I was a residential customer, on today's rates, what is that?
On today's rates, your total bill after net metering is, let's see, $156.57.
Just give me the price per kilowatt hour.
So you are, it's a little, you've got some tiers in there, but you're paying, for the most part, 9 cents per kilowatt hour. and then you go up to close to 11 cents during some of your, just slightly in the summer. So that's not material.
So it's roughly 9.
907.
Okay. 0.0.
About 9.1.
Okay, yeah, 91 cents.
Yep.
And then so what we're saying is if we go to net metering, we're going to drop to the 6 point, what was that number?
The time of use.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't time of use. This would just
Yeah, no, this
match.
is
Yeah, so
before
it'd
time
be
of use, right?
6.488 cents. 06488.
0.065. Okay.
065.
So kind
Now,
of
keep in mind, though, it's not all of your production is at that 6.5 cent rate, because if you're using it internally, you're going to reduce the full retail rate, and then once you start backfeeding, you'll get the 6.5 cent rate. So your production is worth more as long as you're using it yourself, right? And then once you start net metering, it's worth less,
Although,
so.
if the billing is set up on production only versus consumption, that internal consumption is not going to be
Right,
factored in.
yeah.
But how much of your bill do you believe you offset? Just so, basically, what I guess I'm asking is how much of your bill, if you had a 7 kW array, you produce 9,752 kilowatt hours.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that would be at 91 or 0.91 cents, and how much would be at 6.5 cents roughly?
Currently, or
Yeah. Just how much are you net metering? How much do you set back on the grid?
on annually, I consume more than I produce.
But let me see if I can word it different. How much do you send? So basically, how much on a day, just on an average day?
On average day.
How many hours of the day do you send outside the grid?
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, and
If
this is what you didn't want to
Yeah,
do.
well, so if it's in the middle of the summertime, it's going to be
All
a
used?
lot of those hours. I may have a little bit of credit left over in the spring, summer, fall, but in the wintertime, it's not going to be enough.
Because basically, what I'm trying to show is, depending on how many of those go back, if you take 6.5 cents on 9.1, it's about a 70% discount or decrease for that ROI essentially. But it'd be better than that because some of those hours wouldn't be at 6.5. Some of
consuming it
them
on
would
the
be
spot.
at 9. So it'd probably be between. If you split it, it'd probably be 80%.
And I'm not a very average customer to compare because I might have a car charging in the middle of the day right when it's producing, and so.
Okay.
But where another customer, they might be gone all day, and so the majority is being backfed for them.
That's right.
So.
Okay.
So if I look at it monthly, and you'd probably want to look at it hourly once we really get into the time of use structure, but just looking at the months where the production was higher on this scenario, we end up with the months, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months where the production is higher than the actual consumption. And it ends up over those 7 months being 295 kilowatt hours more produced
So do
than
this.
consumed.
Let's just get rough for a second. So take the 7088. Is that how many would be at the 9? What you're projecting 0.91 cents would be at? We'd get a 1-for-1 credit for that. Is that what you're
Under
saying?
the current structure?
Under your new structure.
Oh, under the new structure.
So I like what you did there.
The 7088 would be, no, that's just 7 summer months that I picked because those were higher. So you would get,
So add in there the extra. So I just want to look at the solar offset of what they would get as a credit. Does that make sense? Assume that everything that's net metered, they get the 6.5.
if everything, I'm sorry,
Anything that they actually net meter that's over their production, give them 6.5 cents for just the overage, and everything else give them 9.1 cents.
so I think that's
don't
the
think it's their side.
295. I'm not sure if I can do that really quickly here.
So right now what I'm showing is if you take the 9752, you times it by the 0.91, that tells you that you're going to offset $887.40. So what I'm trying to do is just calculate the new charge that they would receive for just the solar. So if you just scroll up and I'll help you here, see if we can figure it out together. The PV produced minus what their production or what they're using. You just had a second ago. So that minus they're using 888.
Minus the 888.
So if you assume that that month they're getting full retail credit at 0.91 because we're not in time of day. The next month they're at full time of day. So what's 793 minus the 745? I think that's I think you sum those right there at the 295. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if I take the 295 times by the delta between 0.91 and the delta between 0.065, it's really not a huge delta. It's 0.26 cents. It's 2.6 cents. So if you just took it on this 295 times the point, I'll do it for you. 0.026 times the 295. It's like a $76 decrease on the bill over on 887. So it's about a 15% decrease on the solar system is what it is. That's what it averaged to.
Sounds good. I'm impressed.
I don't know if it's right, but I think that makes sense. So basically, that rate. So we're proposing the 6.488 cents. And I think we can open that up in public to Ryan to see if that seems fair. But I don't see why we'd have much hesitation on that number.
Did you say it was 6 point? What was that net credit again? 6.88 or 6.48?
Sorry, 6.488 cents.
Okay.
Yeah. So the average. So what I'm saying, based off of this, and we can clean up the math, but I'm saying that the average solar customer on a 7 kW system would see about a 15% decrease in the value of their solar with that rate.
So the credit is basically 2.6 cents less than it is currently.
Correct. And then
Okay.
what I did is I took out the months that we actually, the first January you're not going to net meter, you're going to use it all. February you're going to use it all. And then March you're going to net meter, so we just took the resultant from the 793 from the 745. The 955 and delta between the 726, so you're net metering the 1080, the 1160, the 1137, just to get the summation of what we'd actually net meter there.
Now this depends on how the billing is worked. If they're billed for consumption and then credited for production versus billed for net metering, billed for consumption versus credited for backfeeding, they're going to come up with very different numbers.
Correct. But
You know what? I'm having a red flag come off real quick as we talk through this, and this has not been double checked by anyone else, so I apologize. But I'm looking at the formula in here, and I think I might have a mistake that's going to be forever on YouTube now. Just pick that out. I took our current PV credit structure, which basically just takes the 9-cent rate and gives a credit for that. If we divorce those two rates and you're getting a higher credit for your own consumption and lower, I need to update that formula because right now it's just giving everything a 6.5 cent rate, which is what John's pointing out. That's like a feed-in tariff arrangement. So the 6.5 cent rate would work if we were feeding everything back into the grid. So I need to fix this formula, and we have it fixed in the time of use, and I just didn't paste it over. But you can see all this logic in here. This logic is basically saying if my production is less than what I consume, use the retail rate. If my production goes over, use the retail rate until it goes over, and then use that other rate. And so that's the formula I need to import over, and I didn't do that correctly. So that's going to change this math.
What do you expect the change is going to be like, Jordan? What's your gut feel? Do you have a gut feel of how it's going to affect it?
I think what you would see, well, currently,
I think that's what we were just talking. I think it's 15%.
what I would
Decrease.
expect to see.
It's all right if it's too hard of a gut feel at this
No,
point.
I
I'm just a
think
little bit
the
curious.
6.5 cents would be lower, because the math would work that a lot of your production is now going to be getting 8 cents or 10 cents. It would be kind of an average of those two. And
So it's going to go down a
and then
little.
so to keep you at the $408 amount we talked about,
Uh-huh.
the 6.5 cents would have to go down,
Okay.
just algebraically. I don't know how far off that is, but so I apologize for that. Don't get too fixed on 6.5 cents until we see what that math ends up being. That was a mistake on my part. But the 408, I've just basically backed into, and the 6.5 cents was kind of the floating figure to get to the 408. So the total impact going from 408 to 156 would be the case. I don't think those numbers will change, but the rate would be different. So anyway, I apologize about that.
That's all right.
What I'll do is import that formula into this, make sure it's running. I'll probably ping John, because John actually helped come up with that massive, ugly formula to begin with. Make sure we're comfortable that that's calculating right, and send everyone an updated rate once we get it in there.
Okay.
Then, Brock, I'm just curious. I mean, you're throwing out this. You've been thinking and talking to us about this 15% decrease. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Reasonable, not reasonable? I'm just curious what your take is on that.
Or if it's necessary.
So I think that's probably a better call for public when Ryan talks. But my understanding is the 6.5 is a fair rate as long as it adjusts with inflation, with where we're at, and then that's when I think that next year, if the problem is if you set 6.5 and then you leave it and don't inflate it, then we're actually going to inflate numbers. So if you set it at 6.5, it's the average rate is not really the right rate to use.
Right.
So I think inflation has to be taken into consideration. But let's go through the summary then. So what we're actually saying is a solar customer would get our rate, which you're proposing, I believe, is 8.8 cents. Is that?
It's
So go to the Schedule A, what we're going to propose. Let's just make sure we're all on the same page on that.
yeah. So this is what Schedule A would look like. Your first tier would be 8.5 cents, really. Your second tier above 1,000 is 10 cents. It averages out to 8.8 cents.
So if we wanted to get rid of the tiers, it would be 8.8 cents. Is that right?
If you wanted to get rid of the tiers.
Please. I just think
I've heard varying opinions on that. I personally, until you get time of use, I think the tiers do serve a purpose as far as consumption and sending that signal. But I'm not married to the tiers. I think I personally would be fine keeping them and favor keeping them. But
I think we would risk overshooting 45 megawatts if there was no tiering structure, because people would say, "Oh, it doesn't matter when I do my clothes drying or all the energy intensive activities," and that would end up costing way more.
I tend to think that people are conscious about how much electricity they use no matter what. We're just in a day and age where everyone wants to get the energy efficient appliances, light bulbs they try as hard as they can not to use as much, whether there's a tier in place or not, they're going to be conscious of it for the most part. And so all I am seeing is when you do the tier, you're actually hurting people that probably have less efficient homes, which are usually the older homes in Kaysville, people maybe with bigger families, things like this that, I would like to see it just be one rate for that very reason.
I guess I don't have a real good feel for it, and I'm asking a question of somebody that might be able to answer it. Is that accurate that less efficient homes are going to go over that? That's not the right question. That the lower income homes are ever going to go over that tier? Do you know, Bruce or Gary? Or
It depends on whether they have central air or not. If they have a swamp cooler, no, they don't. They typically use a lot less power. If they have central air and an older system, they're going to use more power. But no, I mean, for the most part, it's the bigger homes with 2 air conditioners and everything that are pushing over the 1,000 every month.
that was kind of my gut feel, and just a thought that if it's just people that are more of that have more stuff and they're putting more drain on the system, then I still like the double tier. I don't like it if we're hurting people who are lower income and have less efficient homes. I don't like that at all if that's the case, but if that's not the case.
Yeah, I don't really think it is. The average over everybody in the whole city is 900 kilowatt hours a month. That's the average. So that, half are below and half are above that. So.
I think
Is that based on a year, an average of a whole year's
it's a whole
worth?
year. That's a whole year's average.
I think it would more affect low income more on the heating side, because if you can't afford air conditioning, you just don't have air conditioning. You open a window or you run a swamp cooler, but if you can't afford heat, your pipes break, and so you run into lots of other problems. I think it'd be more on the winter side where they're trying to get their house warm so they can stay warm.
However, if you flip this, and I think, so I'm going to be the other side. I think if you flip this and you go, okay, well, now you're going to give 10.2 instead of 8.8 to a solar customer, and I'm sorry, Ryan, I'm just being honest. But if you flip that and go to 10.2, and there really is a subsidy that we still need to determine how much that amount is. But essentially what's going to happen is all the upper tiers would be incentivized more than the lower tiers to put in solar. And so then if you're dropping that below the tier to a tier 1, and then what you're going to do is then we review this next year, then I agree, then you would actually have typically your lower income families be the ones that are impacted and being that number, pulling that number up. So there's the balance of that, of long-term effect, I guess, is the way to review that.
My thinking was, if this sways anybody, I don't know, but my thinking was we're going to change this when we get to the time of use structure. So I thought, let's just keep this current structure the way it is, change the rates how they should be, and then once we get time of use, it'll all change anyway, rather than change the structure, get rid of the tier, and then change again and do time of use. Okay. That's the reason why I thought I'll just keep the tiers so that we go with what we're used to. Right. We are introducing a customer charge, but other than that, not a lot of big changes, and then we'll have the time of use come along. That was my thought. But
if an average customer usage throughout a year is 900 kW a month, the average customer is getting into that second tier during the summer.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's exactly right.
So to continue down,
So let's give both options like we talked.
We've got them both up here.
Regardless, what we're saying is, what we're proposing in Schedule A is an 8.4 tier, and then 10.2, and then 8.8 if it's blended.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep going. Sorry.
And then, so the actual proposals are these kind of grayish boxes. So the next one is an $8 customer charge.
For every customer.
Every customer, yep.
Okay.
On the residential class, and then 6.5 cent net metering rate. If it's a feed and tariff arrangement, I think that 6.5 cents is what it would be. If we do the net metering where you consume what you produce and then any excess you put back on, then that's what I need to kind of go back and figure out what that would be.
Could you clarify that? I didn't understand that. So that would be.
So if we had an arrangement where all 100% of my production is going to the city and I'm getting a credit back, that's the 6.5 cents.
I see.
And if I am keeping my production and then the excess I put back on, that rate isn't reflected here. So that's the formula I have to update if we want to do it that way. So.
Do you have a feel for that?
I think it would be lower. I just don't know how extensive it would be. But it's interesting that I think Bruce said it was 6.2 cents for the commercial customers, and they're on a feed-in tariff, and we're at 6.5 cents on a feed-in tariff kind of arrangement. So it sounds like we're kind of in the ballpark of what you'd said. But I personally, just to throw my opinion in there, I like if I purchase solar panels and put them on my roof, I kind of want to keep the production for myself. So I don't favor a feed-in tariff personally. That's the rate I put in here, though.
In fact, when I hear feed-in tariff, typically a feed-in tariff for solar is used when the value of solar is higher than the value of electricity. That's where the typical utilities use it. Back east, I think in Minnesota, they valued their solar a couple of cents higher than the cost of electricity. So a feed-in tariff actually is a good system for a solar customer. But if this feed-in tariff is a penalty, like in this case, then that incentivizes the customer to just get battery storage or go off grid, and then you've got stranded assets, and it doesn't really solve the problem. So I don't like the idea of a feed-in tariff when it's a penalty.
Yeah, the feed-in tariff on the would not help them on a commercial side. Will not help them on the demand savings either. So they are taking a double penalty. However, it is depending on. Do we currently sign a power purchase agreement? Is that how that works?
We don't have anything commercial yet. That was a temporary deal we did with one at Kays Creek Elementary School.
But was that a power purchase agreement?
Nope, it was just a little handwritten letter telling them this was temporary until we had a policy.
Okay. And then snapshot of the commercial, summary of Schedule A of commercial, real quick.
So the summary of that, you've got 3 tiers, just keeping the current structure we have today. You go from 8.1 cents, just rounding, on the first tier to 5.8 cents, second tier, and on the third tier, 4.3. And then on your power or demand charge, $11.59 per billable kilowatt of demand on commercial B. Commercial A would not have a demand charge, and commercial C is $14.49. And then the customer charge on commercial A is $11, and then $13 on B, and then $59 on C. And then the snapshot of industrial, it's 3.3 cents for the kilowatt hour rate. There's really no tiers on that one. $13.28 demand charge, and then a $90 customer charge.
Okay, so will you scroll up? I'm going to give you a snapshot of what Rocky Mountain Powers are. So you guys have this. Go to commercial, sorry.
Commercial, sure.
In the rate schedule 23 is the commercial customer. They charge a $10 per customer charge. They charge, they do charge a demand charge.
All demand, I think, and that's the facilities charge they charge too is in there. It's like 18 something, over $18 KW.
It's $8.65 per KW up to 15, and then $8.70 per KW over 15. And then they have a time of use by winter and summer months, essentially.
Seasonal.
They do a first 1,500, and it's 11.7 and 6.5 cents. And then the other October through April is 10.86 cents. So I was just trying to see. So we're probably blending right pretty close to where that's at.
Yeah, we're a bit lower on the KWH, a little bit higher on the demand.
They have a
It sounds
facilities
like.
charge too, which is just basically a demand charge. They just add on to it too, isn't it? Rocket's like $4.74 for every KW2. There's a facilities charge that they charge. That goes directly on demand too.
I don't see it on that bill. I know 6 does, but I don't see it on 23. I don't see it there. It could be, but I'm not seeing it here.
Yeah, maybe they're scheduled.
But you don't have any demand, so that would be one of the suggestions here would be to, if you were to add demand to those customers, you know, if you figured
On
363.
the small commercial.
If we were to do that, that would actually probably allow rates to be cheaper, essentially, and it would allow us a little more wiggle room in the in some of those customers. You know what I'm saying? So that's just revenue that we're not picking up, and if we're planning to go there with the time of day usages, we may want to look at that.
Okay.
Let me give you the other ones. Schedule 6 would be anybody above. This is to a megawatt. Do we have anybody above a megawatt in load?
No.
So this is what it'd be. So this is where you have a customer service charge of $54. So this is kind of blending B and C. So we have an in between. Then they have the facilities charge there, which is the $4.04 per kW. So they have the customer charge plus the facilities charge plus the demand charge, which is again seasonal, $14.62 per from May to September, and then October through April is $10.91, and then their rate is 3.8 May through September and 3.5. So the numbers aren't that far off of Rocky Mountain Power's rate schedules. And then what they do, if you go over on a Schedule 6, if you go over the 1 megawatt, then you go into a rate 8. And then that's where they're penalizing you. So now you go up to a $70 per customer charge, $4.76. And then this is where the rates get really high, is your 15.56 on demand and 11.19. And then on off peak months, it's blending about 4.5 cents, somewhere in there. Okay.
So when you're suggesting adding the demand to the small commercial, are you just going to adjust the kilowatt hour rate for that same group?
So yeah, I was thinking that we could bring, if we were to add demand in there, my thought was then you could bring those rates like that 4.2 cents. If we're trying to incentivize business, so if we could bring that down by adding the demand, that would just.
The 4.2
So you're going to add
cents.
the demand on that customer class, the commercial A, and lower their kilowatt hour rate.
Correct.
Okay.
That was my suggestion, but.
Yeah.
So if you lower the 4.3 cents, though, you're lowering it for the really large customers, I think, right?
Yeah, and I'm just saying we could maybe look at bringing those numbers down just a little bit.
Just all three of them, all
Correct.
tiers? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not just the tier 3, right?
Yeah, it depends
That's
on
what
what
I'd
our
understood.
overall objective is.
Yeah.
You definitely don't want to get into the habit of subsidizing one area off of another area.
Right.
So we'd have to make sure that we don't do that. But I think
Just it
bringing
would
the
lower the overall.
price per kilowatt hour down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How big a service does Smith's have?
Smiths?
Yeah.
3,000, 2,500, I think it is. 2,500
Amps.
amps.
What size transformer?
We installed 750.
Okay.
Is that the highest transformer we have out there? Is it 750?
No. The highest one we have is a meg. at the high school, Davis High.
It's 1 MVA or one?
Excuse me?
How big is it?
A meg.
1 MVA, okay. Have they ever hit a meg?
No, I believe not.
Okay.
So action item wise, I'll send out an email with an updated net metering rate here, and then it seemed like there was something else that was mentioned here. Did anyone jot down any other follow-up items?
Yes.
Oh, we've got the application fee process that we want to follow up on as well.
Yes, there's 2 fees. I've got system impact study fee, and net metering fee. Then I think that we want to do a sensitivity analysis for commercial,
Right.
and a sensitivity analysis for residential, which we could get John involved on. Then I said if we could calculate the total subsidy for solar, so we could just see how much we're subsidizing, and that's more for grandfathering, which we're leaving off the table for our discussions, I believe, and we're just going to say this is the subsidy. I think that's what we talked about, so everyone else can figure that piece out. Am I mistaken? I guess we should talk on that, but that was my assumption last time.
Yeah. And I think we could do that pretty quick if we knew what the total solar production currently was in Kaysville. Because if we go off these numbers, it's a 2.3 cent per kilowatt hour difference. So we just need to know what the total kilowatt hour production is that we're currently crediting.
They give you the total meg,
The
KW.
The installed KW. I'm not sure how I'd translate that over to the hourly
We don't know if,
production.
we go off that and use that 1440 number or whatever, right?
Yeah, we could do that, and then we could just pick the Southwest.
Okay.
or
Yeah, what's
Southeast.
the KW?
Where it's 1.1364, I think.
1.3 meg.
1.364. I'd go get. Actually, I probably pull it out here. Changes daily, but
I think it's going to be like 37,000 roughly.
So that would imply if we had an average 7 kW installation, that'd be about 195 customers. If you're just kind of averaging it out. And if you assume each of those customers produces,
I'm watching.
That's my guess.
if each of those customers produces 9,752.
About 2% of the customers, 2.1%.
So that adds up to about a $45,000 subsidy per year, based on that quick math there.
So it seems like that's around half of what we were originally. Does that sound right? Am I remembering right? Seemed like we were around 90 before, but I don't know.
Is that the one that Mark came up with in his study?
Yeah, maybe that's where I'm remembering it from.
Okay.
The subsidy?
Yeah, the original subsidy.
I know
Like
he
right
had
now,
he
I
had
think.
tiers. I don't think he ever. I could be wrong, but on his slides that I looked at, I don't know that he showed what it currently was today. He showed $4.51 per kilowatt, but then he had a total subsidy dollar amount that he was showing at different levels of installation, and I don't think he showed one for the current level of installation. He just said theoretically, if you have this many customers or this many, and there were different tiers. So I don't know if we have that
Really
number
clear
from
number.
Mark, but I know he did say $4.51 per kW, and I don't know exactly how that translates back to what we're looking at. We're looking at it a little differently here, so.
Yeah.
But
That'd be about a $45,000 subsidy currently. So talking about grandfathering, that's
correct. So that's what we'd say is if we wanted a grandfather, that's what it would cost, would be roughly 44,000
Yeah.
per year.
Per year. Yeah.
So I think that's all I have to share on the model for now, and we'll follow up on those few items. I don't think the administrative charge is a very detailed analytical process. I think it's just a matter of getting the line items listed out, how much those cost, and making sure that the charge currently collects it, or if we need to revise it. And then this rate won't be too difficult. And then we'll just do a commercial analysis to see what the sensitivity is. And I think we're getting close, so.
I agree.
Has the city been involved in reviewing this enough that they know how this is going to impact their billing? Are they going to be able to implement this demand charge and
Yes,
these different
Dean,
tiers? And,
talk to Dean and yes,
and they're comfortable with it?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, so any other questions on model review? We have.
Probably just a comment to say thanks to Jordan. Thanks for all your work that you've done on this. I
Yeah.
appreciate it personally, and I know that the rest of the commission does too, so thanks, Jordan.
Yeah.
I know that I had another person that does models similar to this come in, and they definitely had high compliments for you. You know, for us, you know, not dealing with this every day, but you know, I don't remember what the price of our the model that we paid for, but I think it was tens of thousands. So it's definitely appreciated, and you know, to put a dollar value, I don't want to shortchange you, but I know it's tens of thousands is what I do now, so I definitely appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, you've been invaluable, so.
Thanks.
Very
We'll just
nice.
keep the water bottles coming and all that.
A small price to pay.
We'll try to keep the power flow on too.
Yeah,
To your
power
house.
on. Exactly. Yeah.
Then solutions presentations, really that. Other discussions for items for upcoming meetings. So what do we have? I know there's a couple things here that I've got listed. Was the CHP discussion. I know we talked about some battery storage, some power quality, or all three things that we're probably still pushing. I know we want to just push through this, so I'm really just trying to set the agenda for next time. Is there anything that we want to put on the agenda next month?
I think make sure that we get those follow-up action items on there. That might be kind of redundant, but I just want to make sure that we have those on there.
Okay.
Follow up on the permit costs and follow up on the action items that we've talked about with Jordan.
Okay. Can put those on there. Anything else? I'm going to keep CHP and the other three for later unless anyone else wants to discuss it right away.
What about a maximum array size for residential customer?
That's a good question.
So that was
I
brought
think
up.
last time we had written down 15 kW.
15 kW.
Well, that's what it is right now, and I think we should have a little more discussion on that. And I think we should, I'm going to make a proposal here that if we are going to have an action item that we vote on, that we have something to review ahead of the meeting, and a proposal, whoever's presenting it, give us their recommendation based and what it's based on, rather than just bring something up for discussion and then vote. Let's give us a little time to study it ahead of the meeting.
Digest it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say this. I think that just based on the list we just talked about, I can kind of put that in here and have a final recommended model from myself, and I'll try to send that out 2 weeks before our meeting. So maybe 2 weeks from now, I'll email around what the rates look like, and then we can go over those that meeting and have an official vote.
Well, and in addition to that, I think we want to know the staff's feeling on it too. That,
Sure, yeah. So I can include.
It's been reviewed by them and whoever needs to.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not making a decision that they are opposed to.
Sure.
At least they have a chance to review it and comment on it.
Yeah.
And I would like to bring back up the discussion about having 2 rate versus just 1. And
Tiers. Sure.
yeah, I know I missed the last meeting or 2 meetings. Anyway, I don't know if there was a further discussion I missed. I thought I'd gone through the minutes and saw everything, but
I don't think we
But I'd
talked
like to
about
know
it
reasoning.
as a group since
Yeah,
then.
because I think that's an important part of this, actually, especially if that's what we're going to put all our models after, deciding for sure which direction we're going to go in and why
Yeah.
on that.
So you're saying you'd like to have another discussion at the next meeting on it?
Yeah,
discuss it
or further discuss it tonight. I don't know if you're ready to go into it more tonight or if you just want to.
We can.
You talking about tiering?
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
thought
I just-
the time of use metering would do away with tiering. And so once those meters are implemented throughout all the customers, then the need for tiering would go away, and we would just have the time of use billing.
So wouldn't it be more beneficial then to look at this without the tiering to prepare for just 1 rate?
I
Since
think-
we're eventually going to go in that direction anyway?
The
think-
time
Am
of
I-
use will not be a 1 rate. It's going to be
Right.
different times of the day will be different
Different rates.
So keeping the
See,
tier
and I-
for
what I would
another
say-
year or 2 or 3, however long it takes to get all those meters in, probably not.
See, and I think part of the assumption, and it doesn't always hold true, but part of the assumption with a tier is that customers go into that higher tier during that peak time. We don't have the technology to know if that's the case, but the assumption is if you're using more, it's probably during that peak time when you're going over. And so we're just saying, while we don't have the technology to measure that, we'll use a tiered structure to pick that peak concept up. And then once we get the time of use, we actually measure when it's happening and replace it. So to me, the tier is trying to do the same thing that the time of use will eventually do. It's just a crude instrument. It's a crude methodology of doing it because we don't have another way of doing it. But I think the overall idea holds true for most customers. But there's exceptions. For example, the solar, we have maybe 190 solar customers who are offsetting a higher tier, like what Brock mentioned. And so in that way, it breaks apart. The methodology isn't doing what it should be doing. But I think for the other majority of the residential customers, it's probably working the way it would be intended to work.
No, I don't know if this is still true, and maybe Bruce knows. At one point, Dean was having to have his office hand calculate when they went up in the tier.
Not in the tier, it was only the solar, only the net metering.
Only the net
They have to
metering.
do, and they will, and if grandfather them, they'll forever have to do it.
Okay. I was thinking that he also had to do it with that.
No, that's all just a
Oh.
calculation in the billing is done. They don't have to hand do that.
Okay, because that was another concern I had, so.
No, you can put as many tiers as you want.
For me, when Jordan expressed the idea that we're currently on a 2-tier, this isn't going to end, or this is going to come to an end when we get time of day billing, it just makes sense to me to keep it where it's at rather than take an extra step. And I do think that it does in the crude and best way that we can right now. I do believe that it picks up and encourages people to, it rewards or it pushes costs where they belong for people who are using the money. So I don't know if we're ready to take a vote, but I'm pretty firm on how I feel about it, and I don't know where everybody else is.
Okay.
What about, sorry,
No.
here's a thought. What if we just ran I mean, you have it there already. What if we ran a sensitivity analysis on adding the time of day usage in there? Because I think the big question would be for me is, we're going to go to a Schedule A. We throw Schedule A out there, and then all of a sudden now we're going to go now to a time of day usage, which we know we're going to go. You have hourly data as an overall. I wonder if we could just say, here's what our rates are today, here's where they are on the next, Schedule A, and then here's our time of day. Because I think that's really what concerns me is if we have a
Just
rate
having,
shock.
Yeah,
again.
volatile billing
Correct.
because of those changes. Yeah. And when I looked at that before, it didn't seem like just the average typical customer would see a big difference. Let me just double check where we're at. Okay. So, under Schedule A, okay, so the current rates, I have the typical customer paying about $1,000, $1,011 per year, and the Schedule A results in $1,041 per year, so it's a 3% change. And then under time of use, is that the right column? It ends up being $1,000 and $1,068.52, and it's a 5.7% difference
From today's rate.
from compared to today.
Okay.
Yeah. So it goes. The big jump is just because of the increase in costs overall, just a rate increase. But the difference between a Schedule A and a time of use, it looks like it's about $20 difference
Per year?
per year.
Per year, yeah.
So I'm wondering if we could just clean that up and do 2 customers, right? A tier 1 customer and a tier 2 customer. And then what you really risk is a tier 2 customer with solar that pushes it down, and I would bet that the subsidy would be larger on a tier 2 customer
Yeah,
with solar. is
because
what I
they're
would bet.
offsetting that tier 2 bill. Yeah, that makes sense.
Which
can look at that.
incentivizes solar
Yeah,
right now, as long as we have that 2-tier.
right. That's true. What does the? I'm just curious, Bruce, if you have any strong feelings about the tiering one way or another.
No, doesn't make that much difference. Like I said, that was our original thought, and that's kind of why Rocky Mountain Power does that, to try to incentivize energy efficiency. But there are valid points on both sides. I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Where we're going to change it in a couple of years, either way, whatever. As long as the bottom dollar, we get to that bottom dollar, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah.
Speaking to Brock's point real quick, that we could incentivize people to do more solar or whatever. I think it'd be good that as we announce the new program that we're very clear that new meters will be installed and time of use is coming, and I think it would be wise and appropriate to just include that in the announcement.
So what would you do on a grace period on a Schedule A? And then how do we handle a customer that takes on Schedule A rates and then installs solar? How do we immediately switch them to time of day use? How does that happen? Does that happen over time? Do we, to your point, what upfront information are we giving them to make that decision? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
As far as grace period goes, I think that once we make this change and this announcement, we start with all customers beyond that certain point who start becoming solar or net metering customers, we let them know that time of use is around the corner, and once it happens, you just roll everybody onto it. The tricky part for me is looking backward to all of our current net metering customers, and I think to me there's no question that we should grandfather those customers. It's just a matter of time and how long that horizon goes. Maybe it's 10 years and then they roll into the current structure. Maybe it's a little more, maybe it's a little less. I know we've talked about kind of the break-even analysis and how long that should be, but that's where I'm not sure what the right timing is. So,
would you want to do them all at one sunset date, or would you sunset date them according to when they signed up and do it from the sign-up date to 10, 12 years?
I would do it based on when they signed up,
Okay.
personally. If we track that data and we can reasonably analyze it, and each year have customers rolling onto the new rate structure, I think.
Or what if you did it at the time they sold their house? You know, because people don't live in their house forever. Well, not a lot of people do, but that might be a good opportunity to sunset a solar customer. They sell their property, new customer, new billing. You are now no longer grandfathered.
I definitely believe that too. When the house sells and it changes customer, that person is no longer grandfathered.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely feel
that's the way it is.
that's how it should be.
So the net metering,
Yeah.
So say,
New
tell
new
us.
net metering agreement with a new customer. The net metering agreement is specifically with us and the homeowner. So if homeowner changes, they have to get a new net metering agreement. So at that time, they would change.
Oh,
The new
automatically.
structure, yeah.
Okay.
Or another way of saying it is the customer is grandfathered, not the home or the facility or the location. It's the customer who made the investment and bought it based on that understanding. They're the ones that we want to help. They're the target, they're the focus.
the only issue you have with that is it becomes a liability at that point for that customer. And then you may have, I don't know what those impacts are. I believe that grandfathering is typically looked at. It's clearly, so let me say this with a big asterisk on it. It's clearly in the net metering that it's per customer. So in fairness, it's per customer. It is there. It's black and white. I can show you my net metering agreement. However, that being said, is if we decrease the rates on those customers and then flip it to the next customer, then instead of being a net positive to that house, it becomes a net negative, because they're going to take, for this rate, they're going to take 9.1 cents down to 6.8 cents. So they are going to see, roughly, according to my math, 85%, 15% decrease. And so then that becomes a liability if they have a note on the property. So that's the only, I think, issue you would have. But and I don't know what other utilities are, but I know Ryan's biting his tongue, so I know he can kind of comment what he thinks for that portion and what other people are doing.
That's the way it's written up now. I mean, as far as new net meter agreement with new customers. So
yeah, and it's black and white, so it's pretty clear.
I guess there would be a little complexity. Some of the earlier customers, where they weren't wired to a production meter and a consumption meter, their solar might just be going straight to their panel in the basement, and so you wouldn't be able to know directly production. You would only know net consumption.
we're not using the production meter for anything now. I mean, as far as billing, we're not using that anyway. So we're only billing off the net meter.
But will you be using it to
Only
do
to
the
know how
time
much
of
they
day metering? How are you going to switch them over to a time of day metering?
Well, you just change the meter. That we're just trying to keep that separate, just so we know how much they produce, because the city retains the RECs too. So in the future, if the RECs are ever worth anything, then we'd have to know that number, that exact production number to use that. So like I say, it's really not a factor unless we went to a feed-in tariff situation. If we stay with net metering, that's so
They just leave the meter there, and then they just put the API, the AMI meters in, and replace the main meter.
yeah.
So just be a redundant meter that they've already paid for.
So when we decide and we vote on what we choose, when this is finally done, we need to make sure that we also vote on the method for the current meter, or solar users, and have that a part of it, and any other aspect that we've talked about, which I'm not sure. I can't think of what else we needed to send on to the council.
I think tiers and net metering, grandfathering, or I guess it's grandfathering, are the two items that I've heard. I don't know if I miss any.
And then the fees you were talking about too would change the.
And the maximum system size, or how we determine what size is going to.
Yeah, so there's going to be several aspects that we're going to have to pinpoint and maybe vote on separate, not all together, but make these all separate votes.
Okay.
And then one other question, Susan, and that'd be, this thought's come into my mind, if we send it to the city council with those options and they determine them and they can ask questions about it. It's just another approach or another way to go to it. You know, how much do you guys want on the city council for this to be pigeonholed, or do you want options?
Generally, we want you to come with your recommendations, and then we'll have Brock will come as a representative, and all of you can be there. And then, if there's any questions for discussion, that at that point, but we'll want all the council to see all these numbers and all of your charting on all of this, and then once they go through it, and beforehand they'll know what the recommendation will be, then we can go from there.
Okay.
Okay. So let me just go through these one last time. Make sure that they're there. And what I'll do is what I'm hearing is I'll put all these as a line item, and then we'll try to vote on them. And if it starts taking too much time, we'll just table it for future discussion. That way we can start closing some of these off.
Right.
So tell me what everyone has right now, or what I have right now is grandfathering on there. I have the grace period, how we handle that, the permit costs, system impact fees, net metering fees, the max system size, the impact on commercial rates and residential. And I have the sensitivity analysis, and that includes the time of use. So that's the tier 1, tier 2, and the time of use. And then just confirming the subsidy for solar. Is there anything else that we want to?
Now, do we need to get involved? And I don't know if this is something that the commission needs to do or just staff, as far as you'll come up with new wording for the contracts that will be signed with the net metering, the new net metering people. And then as far as sunsetting, how do we deal with the current ones and letting them know how that's going to happen? Will we just send out a notice to them? Will they have to have something where they need to sign so that they know, so we have proof they've been notified of it? So do we need to have a discussion with maybe how we legally will do this? So I think that's something else that maybe needs to be ready to go as well.
Right. That's one thing that's in the net metering agreement now. It's within 30 days notice, anything can be changed on the net metering agreement. So we just have to give them 30 days notice before we change anything.
Go ahead.
Who is our legal counsel?
Right now it's King and King, but we're currently in the process of hiring an in-house attorney for Kaysville.
Okay.
One thing I'd add to your list is the industrial rates as well. You mentioned residential and commercial, but this is also a change for industrial.
Which I guess brings up the demand, if we want to include a demand charge for the A group.
Yeah.
And I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
Another piece that comes to mind is just making a decision on when we send it to the council and to the city council. And I don't know if we make a decision at our next meeting on that, to determine a time to propose it, or.
We just need to know it has to be 1 week in advance when the agenda is sent out. So if that's going to be happening, we just need to give heads up to the mayor that you want to include that on the agenda at least 1 week before the city council meeting. And then it can be added. And so when we know we're ready to go, then we can do that.
Okay.
So right now on time frame, I've added to your list a substantial amount. Obviously let us know what we can do, but August 15th, is that still realistic with that whole list? Is that too much by the 15th?
No, I don't think it's too much, although I don't know that I personally need to be the one to do the admin charge review. If there's anyone else who feels comfortable doing that, or not necessarily admin, but the application fee process. I think a lot of that will come from the city as far as what costs go into that.
Right, the staff will do that.
But a lot of these rates, I think, aren't going to change. I think we can calculate what that solar net metering credit's going to be, but I don't think it'll be hard to make August 15th work. So.
Okay, so you're planning the 15th,
Yeah.
and then I wanted to check the next meeting is the week right, is the day right after Labor Day. Is that okay for everyone? It's September 5th.
September 5th.
I think school will be back in, and so probably everyone's going to be around.
I didn't get my calendar, but I believe it's okay for me.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we'll
it'll
plan
work
on
for me
that
too.
meeting. And then I'll put so the agenda is going to grow. Is there any specific ones that we have to talk about in that list just so that we can vote on them? I'll send the list. I'll send the agenda. Here's how I'll do it. I'll send the agenda with everything we've talked about. And then if you guys want to just comment on which ones we want to make sure on that list, and then we'll just try to pull it down and condense it, because I think the next meeting is going to take a lot of time if we're trying to, yes, we agree that it's 15 kW cap, you know, and then do a vote and those types of things. So do you have a recommendation on how many items we should try to vote through in 2 hours? Is it?
You know, what I would do is I would just make votes on the things we know for sure. If there's still things that we need to work out, then hold off another month.
Okay.
You don't have to send everything to the council at one time.
Okay.
So if you want to, decide, let's do this portion, and then next time do this portion, that might be a better option than
Okay.
doing it all at once.
Okay.
And I like that idea for you to send this out. We can comment, we can kind of put our priority and thoughts to them to say, I feel like this should be talked about, this, and that'll help you then to take our input and
Okay.
put a priority to them. I like that.
Okay. And I'm going to order them. So basically, the higher the not, or I'm just going to put them in a random order in there. But if you can just reorder what we think, number 3 is, number 4 is, number 5 is,
Yeah.
and then that'll help get some of these things checked off.
And I'm glad to work with Bruce or whoever if you want me to take the lead in working on the cost and a proposal for a new permitting structure. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it be you, Bruce, that I'll work with on that?
Sure.
Okay.
Then I was just going to see if, Alan, would you mind kind of heading up a proposal for the cap? Because it sounded like the 15 kW was something you wanted to talk more about. I don't have any passion as to why it should be more or less than 15 kW. So do you want to, my hope was that I'd send out everything specifically that I'm proposing by the 15th. So I don't know if you wouldn't mind taking that on and send out a proposal for that cap maybe around the 15th as well, or it doesn't have to be the 15th, but if you're comfortable
I'll give it a
doing that.
try. Yeah.
That's a tricky answer because you could have a really tiny customer that just wants this enormous array. Then you definitely want to put a cap on that. Or you could have a really high power consuming customer that maybe has battery storage and that wants to exceed 15 kW because they would typically use more than that. And so that's a tough.
It seemed like
That's a
we
tough
had
answer.
talked about a percentage of total
consumption.
demand, right? Total consumption
Yeah.
at one point. And that
Mhm.
might make more sense.
This is I have a question along the cap. Hypothetically, if a customer wanted to do off-grid solar, you guys wouldn't care, would you? Because it wouldn't be tied to your
No.
grid.
Nope, wouldn't care.
Okay, so the cap would only be related to grid-tied stuff.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in theory, you could only send 15 kW back. So if you could use 5 kW of it, then, you could have a 20, easy math, you could have a 20 kW system, not allow 15, only allow 15 to go back and save 5 kW to your batteries if you wanted.
Yeah.
They don't like that answer, but
As long as it's up to code.
Should've been back to
yeah.
And
Really,
you could do kind of a hybrid of both too. Maximum 15 kW and only 80% of your, rated capacity or rated usage. So you put those both together so you catch both those issues.
okay.
Is there anything anything else that needs to be delegated out for proposal in advance?
So you've got the permit cost, we've got the grace period. Grandfathering.
I don't know if John wants to take a shot at that and propose something. And
For the grandfathering,
yeah,
I could take a look at that.
Then we got the system impact study, the net metering fee, and I can do whatever you guys tell me what you want me to jump into. I'm just gonna reassign it.
So what do you mean by impact study? And is that all just kind of wrapped into that application, that upfront application fee? Those
Correct.
two things.
so I'll kind of be.
So
I'll
I think
take
Sean's
that one
gonna
too.
do that.
You know, I'll try to wrap that in and work with Bruce to come up with a proposal for what makes sense.
You have to give me something, so tell me what you want me to do here. We got the impact rates, sensitivity analysis, this is you. We got the max system size. How do we move commercial on demand? So I could look at that if you want me to look at that
Sure.
item and just see, how we're going to adjust that. What you tell me,
That'll work unless.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
take it.
And then a lot of those sub-items that you listed are all kind of all encompassed in this rate model, and I would propose that we vote on kind of the whole thing, like the residential rates, the commercial rates, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, we'll accept the residential as it is, but we want to do something different, because the model's all, it's all kind of one piece in my mind, so.
So you want to vote on Schedule A is what you're saying?
I would vote on Schedule A and the commercial class and the industrial class all as kind of one vote, personally.
Is this presently set up to be revenue neutral?
Explain that. Do you understand that?
So versus where we are today versus where we'll be if we approve this? No.
Yeah.
We've got an increasing costs in the city that are rolled into this.
Okay.
So it's, I think the increase was about 4% to the average customer just based on costs alone, not anything to do with rate design or net metering. It's just increasing costs. So it's not
This will increase revenue.
So increased revenue is part of that vote.
Okay. But the rate, what was the average rate? It's still 8.8, right?
Yeah, 8.8.
Average, I'm just blending for a
Yeah,
second.
8.8. So the customer charge is going to pick up a lot of that increase. So the rate itself isn't going up, but the overall revenue will go up.
Yeah. And, sorry, I'm going to just jump back on that. Will that be your minimum? So like you'll just hit $8 as a residential. That'd be your minimum today, correct? If you zeroed out all of your energy.
That's separate.
Yeah, if
That's
you
a
zero
separate-
out all of your energy, you'll still get an $8 charge if you have zero usage. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So, anything else that we have on topics?
That's good enough.
I'm curious about an update on where we are with AMI. I thought, didn't you go out to bid for?
Yep, we got the proposals back, and we have a meeting to review them.
Tomorrow
we're reviewing them.
And is this for a company to help you do this, or is this for the actual purchase of some of the meters?
This for the company that does everything, yeah.
It's turnkey, right? Turnkey.
Well, as far as the meters and the infrastructure stuff, but not the actual installation of the meters and stuff. We haven't addressed that yet.
What about software?
What's that?
That includes
Yeah, software and all that.
Okay.
And are we looking at a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? How long do you anticipate it'll take to get everybody on AMI?
We're anticipating about a year or 2 years to try to get everybody back on, but it all comes back to cost of what we went out to get bids for. We're not quite sure how long it's going to take us. With that, we do it in phases, and so maybe 2 years to install everybody in the city, but there's additional infrastructure we need to put into that is required for the AMI metering. So
Is that like
we
the
have to calculate-
fiber and stuff like
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
We'll have to calculate that too. So That could be 3 years.
So as you start putting the meters in, we stay on the rate we're proposing until everyone's in, then we transition over
All at once, yes.
all at once.
That would be our recommendation, yes.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
And would it be possible to just distribute the net metering agreements that we currently have for each customer? I know mine's different than John's, but if we could just get a copy of both of the net metering, if we're going to look at the legal, we probably need to see what we've signed up for. So just a sample of those two contracts. Is there only two?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Got to clean up my mess. I'm all over the place, so I'll do my best. If I miss something, feel free to add to that list. And then we're going to push the approval of minutes to next time. So at this point in time, I just open it up to the public.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Ryan Evans. I'm with the Utah Solar Energy Association. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you. I met with Councilmember Lee 9 months ago, whatever that was, several of the council as well as the power company. And you've come a long way and done a lot. And I will echo what I heard earlier. Seeing the massive amount of work put in this, clearly, Jordan, I think that was a lot of your work. I applaud you. I don't know you, but I applaud you because that is tremendous. I wish, in my mind, a lot of the municipalities that have their own power companies took this kind of time, not only just to study the solar aspect, but really to study their own power needs, consumption, alternatives, advantages. I mean, every community is different, and to put this much work into it truly is reflective of a great community, and so I applaud you for that. There's a lot that I heard, and honestly, at some point I would appreciate, and I know I'll get it, but sort of a snapshot summary of all this without digesting multiple changing numbers and incredible formula going across the top that quite honestly blew my mind at times, being a sitting in the back guy versus someone who's been at the table for several months now. But I appreciate that work, and it will be nice to see it in synopsis. I will say that there's several things that I really like in what I've heard. First and foremost, that you're giving credit for behind-the-meter consumption. That's a great principle of rate design around solar energy, simply for the fact, and contrary to a true feed-in tariff, which takes all of the power that you consume and you just buy all of your power directly from your power company, I don't think a feed-in tariff in Utah is something that anybody really wants, a true feed-in tariff. Because I think there's this great level of energy independence and emergency preparedness and all these other little things that go along with being able to use energy within your own home that you've produced. And that gets lost in a feed-in tariff situation. Bountiful actually just did that, and they've had some incredible public outcry already based upon the lack of transparency around that and doing a true feed-in tariff that really didn't give a lot of benefit or any benefit to actually that locally produced solar energy. So there's challenges with feed-ins, and so I appreciate the fact that you've got the behind-the-meter consumption. I can't really, so I think if I read this right, if we're somewhere around that 0.0648 number, which I think is going to change, correct, based upon a recalculation.
That's right.
And if your new rates will be a blended rate of about 0.088, I think that gets you to about a 73% of retail rate. It's not too far off. I mean, personally, I could throw down a couple list of things to maybe look at in terms of that benefit of the locally produced distributed generation solar. But it's not too far off. Generally, again, being able to utilize what you have in your own home is really key to this. And for keeping solar customers in the same rate class as all the other residential customers is important. What you do to one, it's important to do to all, I think, and that's good on discriminatory practices. Coming up to a couple of the questions that I heard. Currently, maybe this is a question I can ask and to help with the cap size on a system, on a homeowner, because I think that's one of the questions that I heard, and maybe I can help address that a little bit in terms of some best practices. How does Kaysville, and maybe I'll look at Bruce on this one, but how does Kaysville currently address overconsumption at the end of the fiscal year or your net metering year?
The way it's written now, they get paid our average blended cost over the prior 12 months for anything excess after they've been on for a full year.
Can you talk in the microphone, Bruce? Sorry.
So, yeah, they get compensated at our average wholesale cost
Okay,
for
so
any
wholesale
excess over the
cost,
year.
not retail.
Our costs.
Right, okay, got
Our
it.
actual blended costs over the,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is one helpful way of doing that, meaning that by bringing that excess down to a much lower level, it does help offset the inclination to oversize your system, because that payback at the end really isn't there necessarily for an oversized system. But the other alternative that you may want to look at going forward is that they don't even get paid on the back end, and that they surrender that extra. Instead of building in a system size cap based upon annual consumption, that gets really tricky. And I know that's been tossed around. I've even thrown that around at times. And now in a year plus of being in this role, I've realized that basing a system size off of your annual consumption can be tough, because consumption can go up or down. You can add an electric vehicle to the mix in terms of your home usage. Lots of different challenges there as to setting it at, say, a 90% or an 80% of your annual consumption. But I think surrendering credits is a pretty typical way of ensuring that the economics and investment to oversize your system is kept in check. So that's one thing to consider, that they don't get paid. Not to mention, if they are getting paid out an amount at the end of the year in terms of a dollar amount, that becomes a taxable, or it can be a taxable item. And so there is some risk there to the homeowner in terms of what that does to their taxable income. And it's a serious consideration on the economics. So again, that's why with typical net metering, they, at least on, maybe Rocky Mountain Power and other net metering systems, they just return those credits back to the system rather than getting use for them. So just a thought there. And if I could help with that, I'd be happy to. In regard to the grandfathering question, it is done both ways, whether it's the meter or the customer. I think that, it may be in their customer contract that it could be the customer. In certain circumstances, maybe going forward, I would say you might be able to put it on the customer. Those prior homeowners, there is that liability of the home's resale value or what that person put into their home if they don't get that same credit. So a lot of times the utility will actually grandfather at the meter, and that's done. It's a mix in terms of who does what. But I think that it's certainly for early adopters that maybe didn't have an opportunity to buy in, knowing what the future may look like to them, or realizing there may be a serious structure change to their net metering proposal or their contract. It might be important to just to grandfather those at the meter until you've maybe given 15 to at least 20 years maybe of that PTO. So as Susan mentioned, Councilmember Lee, regarding the time that they started operating, rather than a date certain at the end saying, hey, all future net metering customers will be done in 2035 or 2037. Maybe go from the time that they started their system actually producing energy. That might be in that. If you clear that out with the 20, then that might help with at the meter versus a customer. And if I'm going too long, let me know. But I know Brock said he threw a lot of different little points at me during the meeting, so I'm trying to hit on most of those at least as I go. One of the other questions I think that is paramount to what you're doing. So right now, and I'm going to use my hands a little bit. So right now you're kind of entering almost a temporary pricing structure for solar customers or future solar customers. So you've got your existing. How you handle those is how you handle those. You're going to have some people come on in the next couple of years. And then eventually, it sounds like within 2 years or so, you're going to have AMI meters on all homes, and therefore you're going to be switching over at some point in the near future to a time of use rate for all residents. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I would at least try to make sure is that if you do transition the customers automatically from that, let's call it the temporary, this 2 or 3 year next phase of solar in Kaysville, that it's a revenue neutral for them or an economics neutral proposition when they go to TOU, or at least give them a certain amount of time frame over those that come on in the next 3 years, give them at least 15 years, for example, of that pricing structure, and then they drop off onto the TOU. It would be really hard to sell solar into this community if they were going to buy in the next 3 years and then be dropped to a uncertain TOU design that they don't know what that would do to their economics. It'd be really hard for a solar company to model that, I believe. So just really give that just a little bit of thought there.
Do you think it would change if we gave some kind of, we've got a pretty good idea of where we're going to go. Do you think it would change for solar purchasers if they had a good feel for what it was going to look like, or would it still be too uncertain?
Yeah, I mean, if you know what it's going to be and
Yeah.
you can give some certainty there.
We've done some modeling on that.
We've got a really good idea of what it's going to look like.
I think you probably could make that work. It would just take and Brock can probably speak to this too, but it would be that question of, okay, you're going to have maybe 3 years of X and then however many more years of Y, and if you can get pretty close to what you think that is, or you do know what that will be, then I think you could do it. But if it's still pretty uncertain, then that creates uncertainty in the customer, and it'd be really hard to buy in. I know I would have a hard time buying a $25,000 system if I didn't really know what my economics were, or at least a pretty good guesstimate of my economics.
Okay, thanks.
No, I think I'd explain that we actually are going from Y to X because we started with X. We kind of solidified our rates as they will be in X, and then we realized we can't do X. So now Y is actually kind of a stopgap. So we have a really good idea about what that future state will look like.
Yeah. So I think that could work. Just really give that some thought as to what the modeling would look like for a customer. That's all. That's the consideration I would give, because they do need, to make this investment, you really do want to have some kind of a consideration moving forward, a certainty period to some degree of making that kind of investment. And if I want to make sure I got this question, but when you were talking potential demand charges, that was only for commercial A, correct? Not residential.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay,
That's
right now.
Okay, good. Because that is a tough thing for any customer to be into this. And again, I do love the fact that you're looking again, applying everything to all customers. I want to see if I missed anything. Brock, did I miss anything on your list as far as? I will say that time of use is a great model for the future. And one thing around time of use is you can help those solar customers help you by incentivizing what that high peak demand time could look like, so that maybe they are more inclined to put west-facing panels on to help offset the community's power needs during peak demand. So it's a good consideration to look at if you can incentivize that behavior. Right? Always want to incentivize the right behavior. So anything else that I maybe missed on that, Brock?
That's my list. I'll open it up for everyone here.
Just maybe a question for you. How does battery storage affect future customers' willingness to get into something like this, where they can store what they collect and use it instead of backfeeding it? Yeah,
I mean, I think battery storage is key, not just for solar, but for all residents as those prices come down. So luckily, the solar world is really helping to drive down battery prices. Batteries are falling, or storage, I should say, is falling at roughly the same pace that solar fell over the last 10 years. So it's a little bit behind. It's probably 5 years behind what solar is now. But thankfully, solar is driving that storage price drop. But ultimately, storage should be a benefit to not only the power company, but to all residents. Because regardless if you have solar, if you can fill your battery up when power is cheapest and then draw on it when it's most expensive, regardless of solar, that's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like it when I see a community get in the way of helping to incent solar, because solar is really helping to drive that innovation. And those customers that have solar are 50% more likely to have an electric vehicle. They're going to be the customers that invest in battery technology down the road, and or smart inverters, or smart load meters, and all these other great little technological advances around energy consumption. So yeah, I think it's an important question. One thing that we're looking at is, as communities and or utilities start valuing out what this export of solar pricing can be for their community, maybe consider a secondary tier in the future around those customers that actually put on beneficial characteristics to their solar. Such examples. Let me give you that quick example because I have it here. Hold on a second. So customers with smart inverters, storage, smart load controllers, and other load and generation management devices might receive maybe a higher compensation in the future. So they put on an average system, they get that regular price structure, and then as they add on these extra benefits that really can be helpful to your utility, they get an extra consideration for that. If that's helpful, John.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions that I can? I do, as I leave, I will say I really do applaud you for taking this time to look at not only solar, but all of your needs in this community. And it goes a long way to how your community will react to the changes. Wherever you have transparency, I think it's a great thing. Certainly the week to get it out to your community, let them know what the changes are coming. The more advance notice they have, the more likely they have a chance to think through it and react to it positively versus the gut check reaction of, wow, we didn't know anything about this. Please help us understand what happened here. So, again, I applaud you and certainly on the transparency too. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Any others here?
Hi, my name's Spencer Luke. I'm a Kaysville resident. Thanks again for your time, especially Jordan, all those numbers. I'm glad you know them because I'm kind of like Ryan, a little overwhelmed. But some questions and maybe some suggestions. One of the suggestions, Brock and I, we've talked by phone about a month or 2 months ago. One thing that sure would be helpful is Kaysville City Council is a little better at this, but would you guys please talk in your mics? I tried to listen to this on Kaysville Live, and Bruce, I can't hear you.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That was on purpose.
No, it wasn't just you, Bruce. Anyway, it's just a little easy. It's easier to hear. In fact, my hearing is already going, so I'm having still a hard time hearing. So, a couple other things too is, so Ryan's talking about the max, and I'm not terribly one way or the other, but one thing about a maximum you have to understand is if it's oversized with kind of how I see things moving, I don't see that there's going to be such an incentive for someone to oversize their system to then get, to be honest, not very much on their return on investment. So my question is whether really putting a max on is that important, because I would assume that people that have that money would invest it in the stock market or something else that's actually more likely to get a better return on investment than trying to create a solar city, where you're just creating solar panels. So I don't know. I question that. The other thing is I don't know if setting an arbitrary number is the best. Okay, what if you get someone, Bill Gates decides to live here in Kaysville and decides to build a mansion? What if he wants more than 15 kilowatt hours? Are you going to limit him to that? Maybe base it off square footage of the home or percent of demand. However, sorry to go against you, Ryan, but Bruce knows we overdid our home. We did not mean to. We tried to go at 80%. However, then we went with LEDs. We still would like to get our house more efficient. Our windows suck. Our insulation sucks. Sorry to use that word, but it does in our home. We would like to do that. When that happens, we'll probably be, again, more than what we wanted to be. We did not try that. We did it at 80%, but we've tried to make our house more efficient. So how are you going to base that off of? Current or when it's more efficient? Because are you going to de-incentivize someone to make their house more efficient? I don't see that's very fair. Because, Susan, you say people that low income and going kind of the tier, I'm not trying to be low income, what's the word? Not caring. I'm not trying to be, insensitive to low income, but at the same time, if there is no incentive to make your home more efficient, that should go for either side too, in a way too. So I don't know. That's a tough one to go on, but we were looking at just one tier versus two. I look at it from both sides too and think, okay, then you lose the incentive to actually decrease your consumption, which then helps everyone at the same time. Quick question. Is there a per kilowatt hour fee on the solar being proposed in this proposal currently? Because we've obviously got a base fee, but I know you talked about doing a per kilowatt hour fee. Is there not that in this then?
No.
Okay, I apologize. I didn't realize the last meeting. I kept trying to get Mrs. Devereaux. Is that right? Is that Devereaux? Oh, sorry. I kept trying to get on the email to get emails when these meetings were, and I don't know what it was. It took me 2 months to get on that list, so I missed last month, so sorry I'm behind. Some other things to consider. I know Case Creek, I'm on the community council for Case Creek, and I know that they just did their solar. And I know that that's up in the air as to what exactly is going on there. However, my only question is creating some kind of pay structure where they get penalized. I don't see that exactly as being the most wise thing to do because, okay, so Davis County doesn't want to turn it on or use it now. Okay, so they just invested a ton of money in something that's not going to be used, and who pays for it? We do. We're the taxpayer. We're paying it in our property taxes. So they just made an investment, don't get a return on investment, and we pay for it again in creating a situation. It's like as if Kaysville City Hall wanted to do solar panels. Would all of a sudden they be exempt from, see what I mean? So my only question, and again, maybe for the city council, is where it's a more of a public entity, my question is maybe should there at least be some way where they can still at least break even too? Do you see what I mean? Something like that. And like I said, I'm not necessarily saying they're penalized, but let's just make sure that they don't. But again, you see, Bruce, I don't know if you're shaking your head or not, but at the same time, I see it has to work for Kaysville Power. But at the same time, if we're paying the taxes, I don't want to see us get penalized as well and pay it more. Some other things. So I know you were asking about the 10 to 15%. Would it be okay to take a 10 to 15% hit? Well, I'd ask you guys, if you moved into Kaysville and all of a sudden Kaysville City Council made a decision that you took a 10 to 15% decrease in your property value, would you be okay with that? I don't think that's exactly fair. Now, I don't, and again, sorry, Ryan, to play the devil's advocate, I don't know if 20 years is necessarily fair. At least from what I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I thought return on investment is usually 10 to 11 years. That sound about right? Average payout invest somewhere between 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years. So how about a grandfather of 11 to 12, to be honest? I mean, if you're going to grandfather, which I would hope, for those that made the investment, why not make it at least to where they can at least get back their return on investment, or at least get close to it? Let's see. And then just to clarify, so we had talked originally, and again, probably being late in this, feed-in tariff was the original thought, but right now it's not feed-in tariff, so we're looking more at time of use. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and that again, just so I understand this, that means that it's not you're giving everything to the city and you're paying a certain rate back. Is that correct? That's feed-in tariff, whereas what we're looking at is not that, correct?
Yeah, so it'd be defined as load side connection, so it'd be after your meter, not in front of your meter. So you would be, everything, all of your loads would be offset first, and then.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I originally thought that was, and I thought that's just insane, because I thought is commercial always at that also?
Commercial, I believe, Bruce, is a feed-in tariff at Case, right?
Case Creek, it's on the one.
Just so you know. So it is a feed-in tariff. They do have, it is connected and are getting paid for that, just to follow up on that.
So commercial will be at a feed-in tariff?
Commercial, we don't know yet. We're debating that piece.
It currently has been a feed-in tariff, yeah.
So, but again, make sure I'm understanding this right. At this point, everything that they make, they're getting less than what they pay, correct?
That's correct.
Yes, they're getting the value of solar.
Now, see, with Case Creek, I don't understand that. So they just put on this whole thing, and now they can't even use what they consume. They have to pay even with that. That doesn't make sense to me. So, especially for a public utility, or public place where we're paying taxes. But anyway, and again, please don't take this the wrong way, but at least look at this. But my also question is like an application fee. Where do we draw the line between paid city services versus that we pay through our taxes versus what to be an extra burden on the city? For example, large developers like Destination Homes. They go in and do their big, huge developments, make millions of dollars, but they destroy our roads. Are we charging them for our road usage?
Well, all new development pays impact fees, which
does that include the roads that they travel on? Not just where they're at, but the roads to get to. So 200 North, in other words.
Yeah, you know what? Every home that's built in Utah, in Kaysville, has had to have construction come in. And so we've all have bore that burden. But the impact fees are calculated, and they do pay for the usage and hookups and new roads and everything, so
But
that's
the
all
roads
taken.
of the development, I'm asking the roads to get to the development. Do they pay for the impact that they have on the development to get to the development with their large trucks? Because I know that that was something was brought up about the roads.
Right.
I think,
It-
money for
are
roads
you
right
understanding that, Susan?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, all right.
I do. I just want to make it so you know that nobody has ever paid for that. As far
So
as
no developer pays
no
for that.
no development from the beginning to now. It's the roads are there. They're public roads. Anybody can use them, including construction.
And that's what I figure, and that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Is my question is where do we draw the line then? You know, and I do value Bruce's time. Okay,
Mhm.
just so you know, I don't want you to think I don't, Bruce. But my question is where do we draw the line at permit fees, application fees for different things? Because I guarantee there are other things that go on in the city. Administrative takes care of it. Is there an application fee to do that? So just something to at least consider. But I mean, that was one that made me think is Destination Homes, 200 North looks crappy right now. Have they paid anything in to try and help it? I mean, that to me is an impact fee of something that we just eat. So that's only my other question. I think that was mainly it. Sorry, I'm just making sure. I think that was it. So again, do you guys have any questions for me? And
I
then
appreciate you coming, though.
Yeah, thanks.
I
Thanks for your input.
I believe there was a couple other questions when you called me on the phone. I think that you had requested, if I'm not mistaken, to see these live.
yeah, it'd be
Is
nice to, because I mean, to be honest, Kaysville City needs to invest in some cameras for. Sorry, but it really needs to be done because we see this, and that's it.
You
And
know,
when
it's-
they're looking right here, there's nothing, and I
It's
don't.
funny because ever since I've been on the council, every year we put it in the budget, and every year it's one of those things we've had to cut off just because other things are more important. And so someday we'll be able to get them.
My question is, how much is it for an extra camera and one extra feed, though? Because we've got one camera here. What if we put in a second camera and it goes there?
Yeah. Well, the deal is with the camera and streaming this live, for the city council, we actually hire somebody to run the cameras and move it because that will swivel and move. But for the Power Commission and the Planning Commission meetings, the deal is nobody is running the camera. It's just streaming, and so it doesn't move.
But just put one camera stationary right here.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to pay anyone extra to move it. Anyway, food for thought. So,
Okay.
what was the other question?
I think that's all I wrote down. I think you covered everything else, all your concerns. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
all right. Well, I appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eric Isom. I'm a Kaysville City resident and also represent Vivint Solar. Hours late, I'll make my comments brief. I'm very grateful to Kaysville for the restoration of the power last Thursday. My wife is thrilled that our freezer and refrigerator foods were not destroyed. But anyway, we lived in a community previously where we did not have the reliability of Kaysville Power, so thanks very much for that. As a resident, I am truly grateful for the level of expertise. This is not to take away from our Kaysville City employees and their level of expertise, but I'm thrilled to see the residents in our community willing to come and serve on the Power Commission. Grateful for your technical expertise and your willingness to serve, so thank you. And also, as a representative of Vivint Solar, grateful for your consideration of solar in this equation. And as a resident, I'm grateful for your efforts to have reasonable rates imposed. The quick question I have for you, and I apologize for being late. I was at a Farmington City Work Council session, but wanted to know your time frame as far as taking recommendations to the City Council, and if the City Council has a time frame in mind for imposition of a new rate structure. Is that something that's been discussed as far as a time frame? I know in talking with Shane Scott,
2 months ago,
he complimented you on getting into the details, getting into the weeds, and I can see from the meeting tonight you clearly are addressing all details and all considerations, but just wondered if you had a rough time frame of when you might be making recommendations to the council and when the council might be taking action on new rates.
So I think that we're very optimistic, and I think if you look at the meeting minutes, we've tried to make recommendations, and then, candidly, I thought that this list would have been the recommendations, and then now that's my longer list. So we were targeting last June. We're very optimistic. So unfortunately, I don't have like a solid date, but it does take a week to get on, and so we'll try to notify, and specifically through the Utah Solar Association, we definitely value your guys' input, and Vivint Solar, being part of that as well. So we'll definitely try to make sure we keep the community involved, having these meetings and those types of things. But the list is a lot longer than I anticipated. I thought we'd be voting today, so we're pushing as hard as we can.
Appreciate your diligence. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just also, Eric, or Mr. Isom, the council, when this recommendation comes before it, we have the option to either vote on it that night or wait until we feel like we've gotten all the information we need to vote. So it would be pretty quick once it comes to the council.
Thank you very much.
Laureen Kamalu, Planning Commissioner. When we worked on an update to the general plan in the year 2014, our Planning Commission worked on it for months. And there was a work session in the beginning with the Planning Commission and also the City Council. And then the City Council did their own thing, and we did our own thing. And then there was not another time that we had another work session to share with the council how we got from point A to end point B. And so there was just a City Council meeting where all of our general plan updates were shared. There were a good amount of people who are here from the city, citizens coming who were interested in this update, particularly because we had recommended a small change to the density west of I-15. And so the people who were there that night were people who were concerned about the change. And the City Council hadn't ever been brought along with the reasoning behind the recommended change. And so just by sitting here tonight, I was remembering that in my mind, what I learned from that experience in my very first year as a planning commissioner is that it's important to bring people along. There's a more political feasibility, more buy-in when you have the opportunity to share your journey a little bit, and publicly. It's not anything that would not be shared with the whole public who would like to come. So just a thought that came to me while I was here tonight, that it might be advantageous to have the two bodies gather with notice to the public so that they can be brought up. This is a lot of amazing technical experience, and what you've done in these months of time, and what you will continue to do. So something to perhaps consider, a work session, so that they can be brought up before they have to make a decision for the public. Thanks.
That's a great issue that we've dealt with and we're getting better at. And maybe once you recommend this to the council, we will have maybe an open house where people can come and ask questions and maybe delve into this a little bit further so they know what to expect. So that's a great thing.
I think that's actually a really good idea if you're inclined to do it. Spanish Fork actually did that. They had a great turnout, and it was a very productive conversation and educating the entire community, both current solar customers, future solar customers. They all felt it was just a good thing to be able to walk it through at a kind of a easier level without all this in-depth analysis, and just talk through the challenges and or opportunities of solar. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay. I have that original PowerPoint that this all kind of began with prior to getting into the numbers, and I've always kind of envisioned presenting that and then showing the numbers after the fact. And so I don't know how long these kinds of proposals usually get at a council meeting, but it would be nice if whoever was presenting, if Brock was presenting, that you could maybe walk through just the concept of the whole thing before getting into the actual rates.
And maybe a good time when you're going to be presenting this to the council is maybe an hour before. We can talk to the mayor and see if we can do an open house presentation, and then we'll go into the council meeting
I think that
after
would be
that.
great.
I'm forgetting a little bit about the presentation. I remember quite a bit of it, but as Lorraine was talking, I do think that there's a lot of thoughts that we've had that would be good to express and share, just concepts about our care for solar and our appreciation for solar, and but at the same time also trying to recognizing that there's been a subsidy that's been occurring, and we're just at the heart of what we've really tried to do, and what Jordan has brought about is just trying to identify fair costs and just distribute those fair costs. And I think even an introduction with some of those thoughts and some of those feelings that we've discussed and felt, and I just think those things would be good to lay the groundwork for the public and for the city council. So I appreciate your vision and sharing your experience. I do think it would be really valuable.
Yeah.
Do we want to put that on the calendar? Can we put that on the calendar? How do we want to go about?
Well, when we know for sure that we're ready to give the recommendation, then at that time we'll also ask to have that on the calendar. And it may be one of those things where if we're going to be doing that, we want as much public input there as possible. We may have to stretch it out and not do it a week prior, so that we give plenty of time to announce to the public and get the word out. So we might have to do it several weeks in advance.
Okay.
Knowing.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's key that we get to where we're ready. Let's not set an artificial deadline.
Right.
If we're not ready, we're not ready. Right. So let's wait until we are all comfortable with it. We've made our recommendation. Then we can have the public hearing, get feedback. We might still need to tweak it before we actually take it to the city council after we get public feedback. So
okay.
This isn't a short trail.
It's not. I'm way more optimistic than I thought I should be. So we're working hard and we're putting everything in, but it's definitely a long.
Well, we're definitely going
journey.
forward. It's just slower than we anticipated.
That's
right?
exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yes.
My name is Brig Lewis, and as I listened, we're worried about we're subsidizing people. One group is subsidizing another. We've got to be careful because that can be a very slippery slope. If you had 100 people in Kaysville who were consuming power at the rate of 400 kilowatt hours a month, where the other average is 900, we can make the case that the 900 are subsidizing the other people. And I don't think we want to go there. We need to be careful about what we're doing. I've heard the comment about people who are building homes. Well, are they paying for all of the roads? We got to be careful, because if we're subsidizing, if we're going to make everybody pay the exact cost of everything they consume, we've lost our community. We've lost our identity as a community. We become a group of individuals. We just need to be careful with where we're going down that path, because you can always make the case that we're always subsidizing somebody. And are we really? Well, you might make that, but I don't think so, because we have a highway and we all drive on it. We have power lines and we all use them. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Did he say something for you?
Greg. That's a good point. I think just talking about subsidies, we can recognize there's always going to be a subsidy of some sort, but we just accept it. For example, the furthest customer away from the power from the main distribution transformer, their line is going to cost more than anyone else's possibly, but yet they pay the same rate as everyone else. The same with mailing a letter in the mail. You if it fits, it ships. The flat rate package, other people are subsidizing your shipping, and so there's always going to be some subsidy of some sort or another. And whether solar has a subsidy or not, maybe we'll just be okay with that. Or if it turns out that it's too large of a subsidy, then maybe we're not okay with it and we have to adjust that. But there was always going to be some sort of subsidy with things like that. I'm on a corner lot, and so I have more gutters, and so maybe the city's subsidizing me because I have more gutter that got put in. So there's always just going to be something subsidized.
Okay, well, what I will say is thanks to you guys for coming out and spending the time with us. It definitely is really good input and really helps us steer us in the right direction, and we're definitely committed to making the right decisions. And so, not sitting up here ever before, that's what I refer to how long it takes to move forward. We're used to building a solar array with 44,000 solar panels in 92 days. That's our record right now. So that's kind of my experience. So we're definitely going to take it right and, take all of your guys' input. So involvement is key for all of us. So please come out. If you have others that are out there, please tell them to show up to this meeting. It's every Tuesday. So if you're not on the mailing list, it's the first Tuesday of the month, 7 p.m., and we definitely do value your input. So if there's not anything else, I think I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make the motion to
All in
adjourn.
favor?
I'll second, yeah.
No, a second first.
Second.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Better.
You are.
Getting
Definitely.
some of the stuff down.